The first time I heard Mara Quinn tell the truth, she thought she was talking to a sleeping man. It was almost 1 in the morning, and I was stretched out on our couch under a blanket that smelled like her lavender detergent. One arm thrown over my eyes, too exhausted to move to my own room. I'd worked a double. The television was still murmuring some old movie neither of us had really been watching. And I was somewhere in that gray country between awake and gone, close enough to sleep that my body had quit on me. Awake enough to hear the floor creak when she came out of the kitchen. I should have said something. A decent man would have cleared his throat, mumbled goodnight, shuffled off to bed. But I didn't move, and I've asked myself 100 times since whether that made me a coward or just a tired man who got handed something he was never supposed to have. Because Mara stopped beside the couch. She stood there for a long moment, and then, so quiet I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed it, she pulled the blanket up over my shoulder and whispered, "Why couldn't it have been you?" Then she turned off the lamp and went to bed. My name is Owen Shaw. I was 31 years old, a carpenter by trade, and up until that night I would have told you I had my life arranged exactly the way I wanted it. Which is a thing men say when what they really mean is arranged so that nothing can hurt them. 2 years earlier, I'd been engaged. Her name doesn't matter much to the story anymore, except that 3 weeks before the wedding she looked at me across the kitchen table and told me I was the most reliable person she'd ever met. I remember waiting for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. Reliable was the whole review. She left, and I learned something about myself I didn't much like. That I'd spent so many years being steady and easy and low maintenance that I'd quietly become a man people were comfortable leaving. Furniture you don't think twice about. A porch you know will hold your weight. So I built walls the way I build cabinets. Clean lines, no gaps, nothing that shows. I took the spare room in Mara's apartment because the rent was fair and the commute was short, and because I told myself it was a transaction and nothing more. Mara was 29, a pediatric nurse who worked hours that made mine look gentle. She came home some nights with the whole weight of somebody else's worst day still sitting on her shoulders, and she'd stand at the sink for a minute before she said a word, like she had to set something down before she could be a person again. She was funny in that dry way that sneaks up on you an hour later. She sang badly and without shame while she cooked. She left me notes on the coffee pot. "Drink water. You look terrible. That's affection." She had a laugh that could turn a bad week around, and I had spent 11 months teaching myself very carefully not to notice it. We had rules. Good ones. Separate lives, separate groceries, no complicating the one steady thing we'd both found. I was proud of how well I followed them. I thought she was, too. And then she leaned over a man she believed was asleep and said 5 words that took every rule I owned and quietly set them on fire. Why couldn't it have been you? The worst part wasn't hearing it. The worst part was lying there in the dark long after her door clicked shut, my heart going like I'd run up a flight of stairs, realizing I already knew exactly what she meant, and that I'd been pretending not to want it for the better part of a year. I did not sleep after that. I lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling and ran the sentence over and over, checking it from every angle like a board I suspected was warped. Why couldn't it have been you? There was only one thing it could be about, and his name was Daniel. Daniel was the man Mara had been seeing for 4 months. He was fine. That was the maddening thing about him. He was perfectly, aggressively fine. He drove a clean car and had a good handshake and remembered to ask how my work was going in the way people do when they've read that you're supposed to. He took her to dinners with white tablecloths and posted about it. On paper, he was everything a sensible woman was supposed to want. And I had spent 4 months being gracious about him because being gracious was the only move I'd allowed myself. But I'd also watched her come home from those dinners a little smaller each time. I'd watched her laugh at his jokes half a second too late. I'd watched her check her phone with a face that wasn't hope. It was homework. And I'd said nothing, because it wasn't my place, and because a man who says nothing can never be accused of wanting too much. Why couldn't it have been you? By the time the windows went gray with morning, I had made a decision, and the decision was to do absolutely nothing. I know how that sounds. But you have to understand the arithmetic I was working with. If I said something and I was wrong, I lost the apartment, the friendship, the one place that had started to feel like home. And if I said something and I was right, I still had to gamble all of it on a whisper she didn't know I'd heard. It was easier to file the whole thing under a dream. So that's what I tried to do. I got about 6 hours. That morning, she came into the kitchen in an oversized sweatshirt with her hair a disaster and her eyes still half closed. And she stopped when she saw me up, already dressed, already 3 cups into a pot of coffee I didn't remember making. "You look like a crime scene," she said. "Good morning to you too. Did you sleep on the couch all night?" She squinted at the blanket still tangled where I'd left it. Owen, we have a perfectly good bed with your name on it. Well, not literally. That would be strange. I was tired, I said. I didn't make it that far. She poured herself coffee and hopped up to sit on the counter, even though we owned chairs, because she always sat on the counter, and I looked very hard at the toaster so I would not look at her. She was quiet for a second longer than usual. When I glanced up, she was watching me over the rim of her mug, with an expression I couldn't read. You're weird this morning, she said. I'm always weird. No, you're a specific kind of weird. You've got your careful face on. She tilted her head. Did something happen at work? Here is where I could have said it. Here is the fork in the road I've walked back to 100 times. She was right there, offering me the door, and all I had to do was tell her that I'd been awake, that I'd heard her, that the 5 words had rearranged something in my chest that I couldn't put back. Instead, I heard myself say, nothing happened, just a long shift. Something crossed her face. Disappointment, maybe, though I told myself I was inventing it. She slid off the counter and squeezed my shoulder as she passed, the way she always did, and for 1 second her hand rested there a beat too long, right where she'd tucked the blanket the night before, and neither of us said anything about it. Drink water, she said from the hallway. You look terrible. That's affection, I said. You're learning. For 3 days I was a very good actor. I made coffee and cracked jokes and fixed the cabinet hinge that had been loose since March, and the whole time I was carrying that sentence around like a hot coal in my coat pocket. Careful, careful, careful. And Mara, who could read a room better than anyone I'd ever met, knew something was off. She kept catching me. She'd look up from her book and find me already looking, and I'd glance away too fast, and the air between us started to feel like the minute before a storm when the light goes strange and green and everything holds its breath. The trouble with carrying something you won't put down is that it starts to leak out the sides. On the second day, I caught myself building her a shelf. Just picked up an offcut of walnut in the workshop on my lunch and started sanding it smooth without deciding to, because she'd mentioned once, weeks earlier in passing, that she had nowhere good to keep the little ceramic birds her mother used to collect. She'd said it and moved on. I'd filed it away the way I filed everything about her, in a drawer I pretended I didn't have, and now here I was at a workbench, making the drawer real because loving someone quietly turns into 100 small useless objects if you let it go on long enough. My buddy Reyes found me at it. Reyes had run the shop for 15 years and had the kind of face that had seen every young man make every mistake at least twice. He looked at the walnut, then at me, then at the walnut again. That's not on any job, he said. It's a personal thing. Uh-huh. He leaned against the bench and folded his arms. You've been sanding that same edge for 10 minutes, Owen. It's smoother than a church pew. Who's it for? Nobody. Nobody's got real particular taste in wood grain. I didn't answer, and Reyes, who was not a stupid man, let the silence do the talking until I filled it. There's a woman, I said finally. It's complicated. It's always complicated. That's how you know it's the real thing and not the easy thing. He pushed off the bench. You want my advice, and you're going to get it whether you want it or not. 40 years I've been married. You know how? I said the thing. Every time I wanted to say the thing and swallow it, I said it instead. Half the time it went bad in the moment and good in the long run. A man who builds a beautiful box and never gives it to anybody just has a beautiful box. He nodded at the walnut. Give her the box, Owen. I told him it wasn't that simple. He told me it never is, and that simple was overrated anyway. And then he went back to work and left me standing there with a smooth piece of wood and no more excuses than I'd had that morning. I brought the shelf home. I hid it in my closet like contraband. That's the kind of coward I was being, if we're being honest, the kind who'll make the gesture and then hide it, so that the wanting stays technically deniable. Then Daniel took her to dinner on a Thursday, and everything I'd been holding in came apart. She came home early. That was the first sign. She was supposed to be out until late, and instead the door opened at 8:30, and she came in and set her keys in the bowl with a care that told me she was trying not to slam them. She had her coat still on. Her makeup was perfect, and her mouth was doing the thing where she pressed her lips together to keep them from shaking. Hey, I said, standing up, you okay? Fine. She didn't look at me. She went straight to the kitchen and turned on the tap and stood there with her hands under the water, doing that thing she did after a hard shift, setting something down before she could be a person again. Except this wasn't a shift. Mara, I'm fine, Owen. You're doing the sink thing. That got her. Her shoulders dropped an inch. She turned off the water, but she didn't turn around, and when she spoke, her voice was very steady in the way voices are steady when the person is working hard to keep them that way. He said I'm hard to be close to, she said. He said it like he was doing me a favor. like he'd solved me. She turned her slowly, still holding the dish towel, twisting it in her hands. You want to know how it happened? We're sitting there. Nice place, candles, the kind of restaurant where the bread comes out with its own little story. And he's been quiet all night, doing this thing he does where he goes quiet so you'll ask him what's wrong. And I finally ask, and he sets down his fork like he's about to deliver a verdict. Her voice went flat and even, doing his cadence. He says, Mara, I've been thinking, and I don't feel like I really know you. 4 months, and I feel like there's a wall. And I think you keep people at arm's length, and I think that's on you, and maybe that's why things never quite work out for you. She laughed, and there was no humor anywhere in it. Things never quite work out for me. Like he'd read my file, like the problem was self-evident and he was just the first one brave enough to write it in the margin. She pressed the heel of her hand to one eye. And the worst part, Owen, the part I actually hate, is that I sat there and I nodded. I sat in that chair and I thought, well, maybe he's right. Maybe I am the thing that's wrong. I've thought it my whole life, so it was easy to just agree. Say I'd work on it, ask for the check. Maybe I'm just. She stopped. Her hand came up to her mouth. I crossed the kitchen without deciding to. I've built things my whole life with these hands, measured 1,000 times before I cut once, and I have never in my life moved toward anything with less calculation than I moved toward her in that moment. I put my hand on her shoulder and turned her gently around, and she came, and she looked up at me with her eyes bright and furious and wet, and every careful wall I'd built came down at once, silent like a house settling. He's wrong, I said. Owen, no, listen to me. He's wrong, and I need you to hear it from someone who actually knows you. My voice was rougher than I meant it to be. You are not hard to be close to. You are hard to deserve. There is a difference, and any man who can't tell them apart is telling you about himself, not about you. She went very still. You come home carrying other people's worst days, I said, and you set them down at that sink so you can still show up for the rest of us. You leave notes on a coffee pot for a guy who pays you rent because you noticed he stopped taking care of himself. You are not at arm's length, Mara. You just hand your whole heart to people who don't have the sense to catch it. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. She was staring at me like she'd never seen me before, and maybe she hadn't. Not this version, the one who'd been standing behind the drywall for 11 months. How would you know that? She whispered. About the sink, about the notes, about because I pay attention to you. The words were out before I could stop them. I have paid attention to you since the day I moved in, and I have been very, very good at pretending I don't. I'm tired of pretending, Mara. I heard you. Her breath caught. You heard me. Thursday night, on the couch, I wasn't asleep. I watched it land. I watched the color climb up her throat and into her face, watched her eyes widen and then squeeze shut, watched her turn her face away like she could still take it back if she just didn't look at me. Oh my God, she said into her own hand. Oh my God, Owen. Mara, you let me? You've known for 3 days? 3 days, and you just made coffee and fixed the hinge and let me. She pulled away from me, wrapping her arms around herself, and I felt the space open up between us like a crack in ice. Why didn't you say something? Because I was scared, I said, and there it was, the truest thing I'd said in 2 years. She turned back around slowly. I was scared that if I said it out loud, I'd lose this, I said. The apartment, the notes, you on the counter every morning. I've lost things before by wanting them too loudly, and I told myself that keeping quiet was the kind thing, the safe thing. And I stood here on Thursday night and heard you say the one thing I've wanted to hear for a year, and I decided the safest thing to do with it was pretend it was a dream. I shook my head. I'm not proud of that. I fix things for a living, and I couldn't fix the one thing that actually mattered because I was too much of a coward to pick up the tools. She was crying now, quietly, the way people cry when they've been holding it a long time and something finally gives. You are not a coward, she said. Mara, you're not, don't you dare. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, angry, and the anger wasn't at me, I realized. It was at both of us, at all the months we'd spent standing 3 feet apart, pretending 3 feet was a comfortable distance. You want to know why I said it? Why couldn't it have been you? Because I was sitting in that stupid restaurant across from a man who was telling me everything that's wrong with me, and the whole time all I could think about was that you'd never say that you look at me like I'm a person and not a problem to be managed, that I come home and the light's on and there's a note on the coffee pot, and it feels more like being loved than anything Daniel has ever done with a reservation and a nice car. I didn't move. I was afraid if I moved she'd stop. And I hated myself for it, she said, because you were off limits, because you were the roommate, the safe thing, the one good stable piece of my life, and I wasn't going to be the woman who lit that on fire because she got lonely, So I told myself I was imagining it. And then I walked past you on the couch, and you looked so. Her voice broke. You looked so peaceful, and it came out. I didn't mean for you to hear it. I didn't mean for anyone to hear it. I barely meant to hear it myself. I heard it, I said, and it kept me up for 3 days. And I'd hear it again 1,000 times before I'd trade it for one more night of pretending. She let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. This is a terrible idea, she said. We live together. If this goes wrong. I know. If this goes wrong, one of us is sleeping in a very awkward apartment while we wait out a lease. I know. You'd probably be very polite about it, which would be worse. Devastatingly polite, I said. I'd leave you notes. Sorry things got weird. That's affection. She laughed for real this time, wet and startled, and it was the sound that had turned around 100 of my bad weeks. And I finally let myself do the thing I'd wanted to do since a Tuesday in the spring. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair off her wet cheek, slow, giving her every chance in the world to step back. She didn't step back. I need you to be sure, I said quietly, because I'm not built for halfway with you. If we do this, I'm not going to be careful about it anymore. I'm done being careful. Her hand came up and rested flat against my chest, right over my heart, which was not being remotely professional about the situation, and she could feel it. I know she could, because her mouth curved. You talk too much when you're nervous, she whispered. I've been told. Owen. Yeah. Stop talking. So I did. I kissed her in our kitchen with the tap still dripping and her coat still on, and 11 months of held breath finally let go. She rose up onto her toes, and her hands slid up to my jaw, and she kissed me back like she'd been the one waiting, like maybe we'd both been standing behind our own drywall this whole time, listening for the other one to knock. It wasn't careful. It wasn't safe. It was the least sensible thing I'd done in 2 years, and it felt like the first true thing. When we finally broke apart, she kept her forehead against my chin, breathing hard, and I wrapped both arms around her and held on like the floor might tilt. Just so we're clear, she murmured. I'm still mad you let me embarrass myself for 3 days. Noted. You're going to be paying that off for a while. I accept the terms. Foot rubs, coffee in bed. You have to admit out loud that my countersitting is charming and not a health code violation. That last one's going to be hard. It's genuinely unsanitary. She laughed against me and I felt it everywhere, and for a long minute we just stood there in the wreckage of every rule we'd made, holding on, not letting go. Then, because life has a sense of humor, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She went still. She pulled back just far enough to fish it out, and I saw the name on the screen before she turned it face down on the counter. Daniel. I have to deal with that, she said quietly. Not tonight, but I have to. I know. And I don't want you to fix it for me. I know you'll want to. I can see it happening behind your face right now. I closed the face I hadn't known I was making. It's a good face. It's a wonderful face, and I'm keeping it out of this. This one's mine to close. She looked up at me, and there was steel under the softness now, the version of her that talked contractors twice her size into doing it right. I spent 4 months letting a man tell me who I was. I'm not letting anyone narrate my life anymore, including you, especially you, because you'd do it gently and I'd let you. I have loved a few things in my life. I fell the rest of the way that second. Okay, I said, then I'll be nearby, not fixing, just nearby. Her whole face softened. That, she said, is the most attractive thing you've ever said to me, and you once rebuilt my bookshelf without a single instruction manual. I contain multitudes. You contain sawdust. We didn't solve everything that night. That's not how it works, no matter what the reservation and nice car version of romance tries to sell you. What we did was sit on the same couch, with the same blanket, and talk until 3 in the morning, close but not rushing, her feet in my lap and my hand around her ankle, both of us a little stunned at how easy it was to say the things now that the wall was down. She told me about her mother, who died when Mara was 19, and how the two of them had gotten so good at saying they were fine that being fine became a kind of language she'd never learned to unspeak. She told me she'd learned to be useful because useful people don't get left, and how she'd built her own clean lines and tidy walls, same as I had, and how it had taken a whispered accident in the dark to make her see them. And I told her about the kitchen table 2 years ago, the word reliable and the empty silence after it, how I'd walked out of that engagement and decided the safest way to be was to be a good porch. Solid, dependable, something nobody thinks twice about and nobody has to catch. You were never a porch, she said somewhere around 2 in the morning, her voice going soft with sleep. You were the whole house. You just kept the lights off so nobody would knock. I didn't have anything to say to that. So I got up. She made a small protesting sound at the loss of warmth, and I told her to hold on, and I went to my closet and got the walnut shelf and brought it back to the couch and set it in her lap without a word. She looked at it for a long moment. She ran her thumb along the edge Reyes had teased me about, the one I'd sanded smooth enough for a church pew. And then she understood what it was, and her face did something I'd never seen it do. Cracked all the way open, no wall left anywhere. "This is for the birds," she said. "My mom's birds. I told you about those once. Months ago. I told you once." "I know. You made this on which day?" "Second one," I admitted. "I was supposed to be eating lunch." "You've been walking around for 3 days knowing how you felt, and instead of telling me, you built me a shelf and hid it in your closet." She was laughing and crying at the same time now, which is a thing only Mara could do, and make look like the most natural expression a face could hold. That is the most emotionally repressed act of love I have ever heard of in my life. I contain multitudes. You contain a lumberyard and a locked heart. She pulled the shelf against her chest and leaned into me, and I wrapped the blanket back over both of us. "Thank you," she said quieter, "for seeing the birds, for remembering. Nobody remembers the things I only say once. I remember everything you say once." She was quiet for a while, then almost too soft to hear, "That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's all any of it is, somebody who remembers what you only said once." I pulled the blanket up over both of us and let it sit there, true, in the dark. The Daniel conversation happened that Saturday, and she was right to keep it hers. She met him at a coffee shop, public and neutral, and I did not hover outside like a man in a movie, though I wanted to. I stayed home and built a spice rack she didn't need, and checked the clock roughly every 90 seconds. When she came back, she came through the door and straight into my arms, and she stood there for a minute with her face against my chest. "How'd it go?" I asked. He said I was making a mistake. I felt her shrug against me. He said the roommate thing was a cliché and I'd regret it. He was very calm about it. He does calm the way some men do superiority, like it's a favor he's granting you. "And you said?" She leaned back and looked up at me, and there was no wobble in her now, none at all. I said it isn't a cliché. It's the first time in years I've been close to someone who actually looked. And then I told him I hoped he found someone he thought was easy, because I was done trying to be. She smiled. Then I left a 15% tip and walked out, which felt very cinematic until I realized I'd left my scarf and had to go back in. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. "It ruined the exit entirely," she said, sitting down next to me. He watched me come back for the scarf. There was eye contact. It was humbling. "You held the line, though." I held the line. She tucked herself under my arm, and it was already becoming the most natural thing in the world, the way she fit there. Turns out I'm not hard to be close to. I'm just selective about who gets to. We didn't rush the rest of it. That surprised people, I think, the ones who found out, the way people always find out. We kept separate rooms for a good while, because rushing felt less honest than choosing, and we'd both had our fill of the fast version that looks like love and isn't. We went on real dates. The first one, I was so nervous I changed my shirt 3 times, in my own apartment, while the woman I was taking out could hear me through the wall opening and closing the closet, and when I finally came out, she was leaning in the hallway with her arms crossed and the most delighted expression on her face. "Was there a fashion emergency?" she asked. "Structural review," I told her. "I need eyes," she said, and looked me up and down slow enough that I forgot the sentence I'd practiced. That became the pattern. Every time I got smooth, she got faster. There was terrible mini-golf, where she cheated openly and dared me to say something. There was a diner at midnight where she stole fries off my plate before her own food came and told me it was tradition now. And it became tradition. We still do it. There were Sunday mornings at the farmer's market where she made me try things I couldn't pronounce and I pretended to hate every one of them, and she caught me going back for more of the one I'd complained about loudest and never once let me forget it. And there was the night I met her father. He drove up from 2 states over on the excuse of a fishing trip and the actual purpose of inspecting me, and he sat at our little table and ate the dinner Mara had panic cooked and asked me exactly 4 questions. And the fourth one was, "You planning to be careful with her or planning to be honest with her? Because in my experience, a man can only pick one." And I said, "Honest, sir, I already tried careful and it nearly cost me everything." And he looked at me for a long second, and then he nodded once and asked for more potatoes. And Mara squeezed my knee under the table so hard I nearly dropped my fork. Slowly, the apartment stopped being two people's careful arrangement and became something with no seams in it at all. Her books migrated onto my shelf. My coat learned to live on her hook. The walnut shelf went up on the wall by the window, and one by one, the little ceramic birds came out of the shoebox where they'd lived since her mother died and found a place in the light. She stopped knocking before she came into my room, on Saturday mornings and started arriving with 2 mugs of coffee and cold feet she'd tuck against my leg without asking, because she knew by then that she never had to ask. There were hard nights too. I won't pretend there weren't. There was one about 4 months in that nearly undid us, and it's worth telling because it's the truer picture than the farmer's market ever was. A job of mine went sideways. A client refused to pay. A supplier came after me for material I'd already installed. And for 2 weeks, I did the thing I've always done under pressure, which is go silent and small and disappear behind the old drywall where nobody can see me struggle. I told myself I was protecting her from it. That's the lie I always reach for first. I'm not shutting you out, I'm sparing you. Or let it ride for exactly 11 days. On the 11th, she came and stood in the doorway of my workshop with her coat still on and her keys in her hand. And she said, I need you to hear something, and I need you to not fix your face into the calm one while I say it. So I didn't. I let my face do whatever it wanted. When you go quiet like this, I don't feel protected, she said. I feel like I'm 19 again, standing in a hallway while somebody I love decides I'm not strong enough to be told the truth. My mother did that. She spared me right up until the day there was nothing left to spare me from, and then I had about a week to say goodbye to a woman who'd been dying for a year without telling me. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. I did not sign up for another person who loves me by leaving me out. If it's bad, I want the bad. I want all of it. That's what close means. You don't get to hand me the good days and keep the hard ones like they're yours alone. I stood there with a chisel in my hand, and every careful wall I'd ever built, and I understood finally that the walls had never once protected anyone. They'd just made me lonely in a well-organized way. The client stiffed me, I said. It came out rough. The suppliers threatening to sue. I've been lying awake running numbers and I didn't tell you because I was ashamed. And because somewhere in my head being a man means carrying it alone, and I'm sorry. You're right, I did the thing. I built a wall and called it a favor. She crossed the workshop and put both hands flat on my chest, over the heart that has never once behaved itself around her, and she said, then let me in. That's it. That's the whole ask. Let me in and we'll be scared about the money together, which is objectively more fun than being scared about it alone. We were scared about the money together. It got handled. It always does. But that's the night I actually married her, if you want the truth, long before there were rings involved. That's the night I put the tools down. She still braced for people to leave, too. Still flinched sometimes when I got too close to the parts of her that her mother's silence had taught her to guard. Still tested the ice before she'd stand on it. We got better at it. Both of us. That's the whole secret nobody tells you. You don't arrive at love finished. You just keep choosing to knock and keep leaving the light on and keep saying the true thing out loud even when the safe thing is right there and easier. A year later, almost to the day, I came home from a long job to find her asleep on the couch. Same couch. The blanket had slipped off her shoulder, and the television was murmuring some old movie neither of us had really been watching, and she was somewhere in that gray country between awake and gone. I stood there for a long moment. I pulled the blanket up over her shoulder, and I leaned down, close to her ear, and I whispered the truth back to her, the same shape as the one she'd handed me a year before in the dark. It was always going to be you, I said. Her eyes opened. She'd been awake the whole time. Of course she had. She smiled up at me, sleepy and certain, and reached up and pulled me down beside her. I know, she said. I heard you the first time. So that's the story. That's the whole thing. A man too careful to say what he wanted, and a woman too guarded to say it either, and 11 months of standing 3 feet apart in a kitchen calling it comfortable. It took a whisper meant for no one to bring the walls down. 5 words she never meant me to hear. I think about that sometimes. How much love goes unsaid in the world because we've all gotten so good at being fine? How many people are lying on the couch pretending to sleep, and how many are standing over them, holding a sentence they're too afraid to let go of? I think about how close we came to letting it stay a dream, how easy it would have been, how much I would have lost by keeping the lights off. Don't do that. If you take one thing from a story about 2 people who almost missed each other out of sheer politeness, let it be that. Say the true thing. Leave the note on the coffee pot. Turn the lights on so the person you love knows they can knock. You never know who's awake, listening in the dark, waiting to hear it. What would you have done if you overheard someone you cared about whisper something they'd never say to your face? Would you say something the next morning, or would you keep it to yourself the way Owen almost did? Have you ever had a friendship quietly turn into something more, and only realized it too late, or right on time? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one of them. And for those of you who'd like to stay a little closer to stories like this one, we've opened memberships, where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If this one meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.